Hello, good morning, and welcome to this Logistics Manager webinar sponsored by BluJay's Solutions. I'm John Thornton, editor at Carbo Media, the publisher of Logistics Manager, and your host for today's session, which forms part of BluJay's Frictionless Supply Chain series for 3PLs and logistics service providers, with a particular focus today on customs and Brexit. Designed especially for freight forwarders, this webinar asks whether frictionless is possible in a post-Brexit landscape. It's a pertinent question and one that requires answering, especially for organizations that may be trying to keep up with demands, missing deadlines, tiring of their manual processes, or even perhaps feel like they're falling behind in a dynamic trade environment. Providing a deep dive into the question of frictionless are BluJay's Solutions Director of Solutions Consulting, Stefan Tarnberg, and Ron Verhagen, Vice President of Solutions Consulting at BluJay. Together, Stefan and Ron will discuss what's happened since the end of the Brexit transition period, what's worked and what's not working, as well as trading after Brexit. They'll examine the daily challenges and look at whether it's possible to remove supply chain headaches via the use of data, networks, and applications. At this point, I'd like to encourage viewers to ask questions throughout the presentation via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please remember to submit your name, job title, and company name when doing so. I'll pose as many of these questions as possible to Stefan and Ron in the time available following the presentation. Also, a recording of this webinar will be made available to view on demand from this afternoon via logisticsmanager.com. And with that, I'll now hand over to Stefan and Ron to start the presentation section of this webinar.
So hello everybody and welcome to this seminar. Me and Ron has been working a couple of years together now, and we are a little bit focused on different areas. I'm focusing on the customs problems, and Ron is focusing on the transportation and logistics problems around this. Ron has also background from customs, so he knows a lot about customs also. And I'm from Sweden, so I'm familiar with borders, especially the Norwegian border, but I worked in European community for a long time with customs, over 20 years with customs systems for different countries in there. And Ron, you can present yourself a little bit.
Hi, I'm Ron. Thanks for having us here from BluJay, and thanks John for the introduction. So we hope it will be a fruitful session today. We'll try to give you some insights left and right on all the process around Brexit. And thanks, Stefan. You can start the presentation right now.
Yeah, so we have set the Brexit deal, Ron, and I think this is something that we have seen. It came on Christmas Eve, the free trade agreement. And I'm not sure where we are with it right now, if everybody knows what it is about. Ron, do you have any thoughts on this?
I would have more like a question. So are we talking here about the full trade zone, or are there any implications which we need to consider or take into account?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, it's a free trade deal, yes, but it implicates a lot of different rules into trade from both sides of the channel, so to say, from EU perspective and from UK perspective. And I don't see it as a very free trade, because it makes the companies really look into the agreement and understand the agreements of what they can do with that to minimize the costs around imports and into UK or imports into EU based on the products they produce or sell in the both sides of the channel. So there are holes in there are rules in there that you need to cope with to have it as a full free trade. And I think that is very important when you look into it and read the lines. And I've been discussing this with other colleagues around in Europe, that it's very complex of settings that you have within the free trade agreement, and also restrictions around that. So I think the newspapers have looked into it from a good way in here, but you need also to take the political side of saying, have they successfully done it a good way? Well, yes and no. They arranged a free trade agreement, but I'm not sure that everybody is happy around it. So we continue a little bit, and from there we have seen disturbances in the logistics flows. And how do you, Ron, from your side, have seen this in the transport market?
Yeah, we do have, of course, quite a lot of logistics company transporting goods in and out of the UK in different ways, freight forwarders, trucking companies, and yeah, based upon different modalities. But we've seen, of course, quite some disturbances in logistics flows. It is affecting the logistics operations considerably, I would say. It is leading into lowered volumes from both sides due to the paper or administration or not completely being in order, specifically at the smaller companies, or feeling that the customs processes are maybe too complex. They need help. And of course, we are out there, and there are multiple companies helping out there in a very good way. So one of the customs examples, which is maybe a specific example, but is that claiming preferential status is a slightly different process depending on the direction of the flow. And that is, for a lot of companies, hard to understand, right? So you need to have that knowledge in-house or externally to your software vendor or maybe legislation partners, etc. So you need to reach out.
Yeah, I've seen that. I mean, if we look at what we could see in the press around the Brexit and the 1st of January, we saw those two companies coming out and stopping their processes for that because of the paperwork was not there for the shipments. So it was hard for them to perform the transports of those goods crossing into UK, and therefore they stopped it to gather all the data and to gather all the documentation around that. They now are up and running again, we need to say so. But of course, it puts demands into the transport business for gathering all the necessary information. And as you say, preferential is important here. Where does the goods come from, where it's originated, where it's produced, and the preferences of calculation exactly the country of origin is important.
Yeah.
So when we talk about that and preferential, I think that is also affecting the private citizen and the end user of these goods. And what we see here also within that is that the transport costs have gone up, and the goods have gone up in costs due to that, and that affects the consumer goods in UK especially, because UK is a big importing country from Europe, and the end use of the product is the citizen, and they will see the raise of costs here, especially if you don't have the preferential knowledge on how to classify the goods of the country of origin. And this is all the pre-declaration process that you need to cope with, I think. Any more insight on this as you see in the market of transports here? Will this affect the transport volumes, do you think?
Yes, of course, and we will see that later on in the presentation when we're talking about relocating, etc., etc. But it is affecting the whole flow of goods. So and prices will go up for the UK citizens.
That's true. That's true. So based on that, Ron, in Netherlands there has been. I mean, Netherlands is a big hub for logistics providers, and have we seen any trends in the market on how the warehouse locations are building up, or English companies coming into the warehouses in Netherlands for this?
It's booming business now in the Netherlands, warehousing. So a lot of, let's say, UK-based companies are looking abroad for other solutions to relocate their goods, and this will lead in the end to rearrange of trade lanes. So you have to bear in mind that the main European corridor in the past included the UK, and we see now more and more that in the UK there will be more like domestic trade lanes existing, and the main corridor, that whole process will go to either Rotterdam Harbour, Antwerp Harbour, or into Ireland, and that will have an effect on all of the trade lanes, and as a side effect, yeah, because of the fiscal climate in the Netherlands, for instance, bonded warehouse is a very good opportunity for a lot of companies, for manufacturers from outside of the EU, but also maybe for manufacturers from the inside of the UK. So yeah, a lot of choices there, and that's the reason why probably the Netherlands is now booming.
Yeah, and I mean, also from the UK perspective, we have seen this affect the UK businesses, especially in the e-commerce business, where we have seen bonded warehouses popping up, simplifications like CFSP and bonded warehouses to cope with goods staying in the warehouse and then distributed inside or outside UK is then affected. And I think this is something that is coming up more and more, both in Netherlands, where Netherlands is a big hub for logistics, to be able to cope and take away the cost and the additional cost if you import directly into Netherlands an article, and then you pay duties and tax on it from a third country, you pay that into EU, and then you export it again to UK. That cost will be additional to the cost that you imported into the Netherlands. So from a customs perspective, I see this is, I mean, if you put your warehouse in Netherlands, you have a bigger market to fit in, and also with the bonded warehouse, you are flexible to send it out to UK without an additional cost. So I think this will affect both UK and Netherlands, and also countries around Netherlands like Belgium and France, where a lot of the goods flow through today to UK businesses also. What we also have seen, and the VAT has been exposed for smaller companies, and this is an article also on around that, and this is something that you need to take into consideration when you work with your e-commerce business, how you use your delivery terms, etc., from your UK e-commerce business into Europe. Do you deliver DDP, which means that you as an e-commerce business take all the costs on your side? How will you perform that import declaration into, for instance, Netherlands or France? Will it be fiscal representative there who handles the goods, or do you have your own distribution and company there, and all that? So I think this is also something that you need to look into.
Yeah. I think, Stefan, the additional side, what we as BluJay did, of course, we need to be compliant with legislations, etc. So we changed, of course, all of our solutions to be VAT compliant to let's say the Brexit rules, and not only that, but our people are up to speed to help out our customers on legislation questions and compliance asks. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. It is really true from that perspective. I think what you see in the market with the booming, as you said, warehouses, etc., and taking care of the VAT and the costs around that, that's something that we work day to day with our clients on both sides of the channel. With that, we have been delivering solutions for customs, for bonded warehouses on both sides for over 30 years in there. And but the last year has been a tremendous year in the number of new companies coming into us and asking for their to help them set this up and do the simplifications of trade in there, and what we can facilitate in our systems, both from an LSP perspective and also from a e-commerce perspective, is saving a lot of money for the companies. So from your side, on the LSP side, how do you see that from our system perspective to the LSP? What can we support with there?
Yeah, in this case, if we're talking to this slide, because this is not a direct effect, it's just a postponed effect, right? So
yeah,
in this case, we are supporting the simplifications and the prioritization of the goods flow over that. And the UK has established now a 6 months period notice to be compliant until the 1st of July. So a lot of people are focusing on effect what is today, what is happening today, right? But this is a rule which needs to be applied by the 1st of July. So every company needs to be aware that it is going to happen, an additional rule on the 1st of July. So they need to prepare now, right?
Yeah, and that is very true, because I mean there is a grace period or a transition period where there are a couple of steps of things that will happen to the UK side of customs, and this 6 months is of course a very good grace period, because it simplifies the goods flow over crossing the border, but at the same time you need to cope with the data set, because you need to prove before 1st of July what you have done under the period from 1st of January to 1st of July. And that is something that I think companies today are not aware of, that they need really to cope and have control over the goods flow that flows pretty simple over the border today into UK and out from UK, but needs to be then filed into customs 1st of July with the declaration processes and structures for that.
Okay.
And I mean, from a government perspective, it's a 6 months period of not getting the taxes into HMRC also, and that's what this article is about. It is a cost, of course, for the government in this.
Next slide. I think we are talking about changes of trade for the smaller companies, right?
Yeah.
This is also a bit of a side effect. So the question for me to you would be, are the trade changes to small companies will affect costs? So how do you think they can overcome that obstacle?
Well, there is effects on the smaller companies and the paperwork that needs to be handled. Most of the smaller companies are using brokers or freight forwarders to use this, but from their perspective, they also need to look into how they get the right information to the broker or the freight forwarder to do the declaration the right way, because it's a lot of things that needs to be taken into consideration when it is a declaration process. It is the invoice, it's the HS number, the right correct HS number for that product. Have you classified the goods correctly? Where have you produced it? And if you are in the meat or fish or grocery industry, you probably need veterinarian controls, etc. And I know from a Netherlands perspective, we have electronically messages for all those certificates that needs to be approved by the government. That's an electronic one. In UK, that's not electronic at this point. It is still, well, electronic. Yeah, it's a homepage where you can log in and register and get the document and get the references, but there is no electronic messages going back and forth between the government and you as an exporter or importer for that, which simplifies the process as they have done in Netherlands. And I think that is also something that you need to take in consideration when you look at you as a smaller, maybe exporter of live animals. If I'm exporting sheeps or horses. I sell a horse to Netherlands. Well, that's a huge project today to sell a horse, first of all, but then also all the paperwork around it, all the controls that needs to be done to ship it over. Before it was inside EU and it was under EU legislation. Now it's two different legislations how you do that, and that needs to be controlled for that.
Talking about horses, let's speed up a little bit because I
Yep.
think we have still some flights to go. So
We do.
The export and import balance. So I think you had a question to me about that one, right? So how
Yeah, I mean, what's the implication? Do we see that already in the market today?
massive, yeah. So truck drivers are having difficulties, right? So it's just a small quote from a freight forwarder in the UK. We normally, let's say, moves 10,000 loads annually with equal import and exporting flows. It's very difficult to export from the UK because of, let's say, the smaller companies need to get all of that paperwork and get everything in place. And the pressure on them is quite high because the buyer might step over to another seller, right? It's very easy. It's a buying and selling market. So we can't trust the volumes, and the volumes are going down. So the truck drivers are having a bad time at the moment. And if they have, let's say, a load, are they sure that they have a backload? In the past, it was very good, but now it's very difficult to get that backload. And driving around with empty pallets or empty cases, that's not nice, right? That doesn't bring in any money.
Yeah, and you, as a truck driver, you need to think of not bringing your own food. Also, we saw that on the news.
Yeah, and then all again on top of it, still delays at the Eurotunnel while the volumes are not even high. It's
yeah
hard. I'm feeling with those truck drivers.
It is, yeah. So the facts around this is that we have seen that the border controls are there. You need to be coping with those. You need to be coping with declaration. You need to be coping with all the documentation around the declarations and the proof. Also the preferential calculation around the country of origin of the goods, so you can get off and get free trade with no zero rate of duties for it. And the free trade agreement you need to look into, and the fact is it is there, but it's you need to look into it from your company perspective. And then you of course have all the different things around live animal food, groceries, etc., where you need all those certificates to prove everything around it. And you also need to think of how you work with between the countries. Do you as an exporter have a GB EORI, or do you have a EU EORI as a company? If you're in UK, do you have a duty deferral account to handle your import duty and tax for the goods taking in from EU, etc.? And these are very important things, steps to take into consideration as a company for that. So I think it is important coming on.
But this is a nice slide, right, about the UK products. Of course, we know that in the UK, they are heavily focused on the automotive business. And this is a frequently asked question, but building EV cars in the UK might cause problems, I heard. So from a quote from a respected CEO was, if batteries go out of the UK, then automotive will go out of the UK as well. So how does that fit together?
Well, it's all about UK origination content of the car. I mean, how much of the car products or the buildup of the car is manufactured in UK, and how many parts are coming from other countries? And the battery, from that perspective, needs to be produced because it's the major part of the car and the most expensive part of the car also in there. So
that's going to be hard. Then
yeah,
set up a whole new supply chain building those batteries in the UK, right? So
yeah,
lots of challenges also for big industries.
it is. And you need to take that into consideration when you look at systems and how you can support that with systems to have full control and also classify the goods. And I mean, if you look at this is pretty interesting when you look at the number of ferry companies or number of places that you can ship goods back and forth between the countries. But what is also interesting is that I don't know if you have seen it, but I've seen a little bit of goods flows going direct from EU, so to say mainland directly to Ireland now.
Yep.
Because of bypassing the border.
So
is that something you have seen on your side also? Yeah.
Yeah, there will be some changes in ferry lanes.
And there are a lot of countries connected to UK, but very few parts that go directly into Ireland. I think this is important also for everybody to understand that it will affect their supply chain also in here.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, if we look into it, there are functions and structures of how you perform. For instance, an export declaration from UK. You can use the transit procedure also from UK. There is a new process of GVMS, which is the port authorities, where you can file several MRN numbers into GVMS and get a reference to simplify the process for the truck to pass through the port of Dover or the port of Calais, and the end result with the smart border. And also what we have seen now is the request for security filing, which is coming into scope, the ENS into France, for instance, or 1st of July, that will be also affecting the UK side. So that means that the ENS or the safety and security message needs to be in place for 1st of July next year, which will affect the transport companies, and they need to prepare for that in there. So I think from our side, we provide all this to our clients, and we help both our transport companies, our freight forwarders, our shippers, our e-commerce business to facilitate that in our systems. So I think from that, we can help you do frictionless supply chain as much as possible, but changes on the market is coming there, and you need to be able to have a provider that cope with that. And I think from our perspective, we see that, and we also prepare for that, and we'll see what happens after 1st of July when the next steps in the border controls comes in place for this.
Yeah, I'm looking at one of the Q&As, and it's mentioned that the biggest problem is to get trucks to collect goods from our factory in the UK. Need to go out of contract and pay a double cost. So yes, that is exactly this is exactly the case why a lot of companies are looking to relocate their warehouse into Europe because of those costs, right? And I think the UK government needs to come with a certain rule sets or an agreement to make it more tangible for the production sites in the UK, because doubling costs doesn't help. That doesn't help anybody, right?
That's true.
Okay.
John, any questions coming in from the audience, or anything that needs to be addressed from there?
Absolutely. Firstly, Stefan, Ron, thank you very much for such an insightful presentation on such a current and vital topic. As you mentioned, we are now going to enter the Q&A section of the webinar, and we do in fact have a few questions for you both. The first question asks, now that Brexit is here, how can we as a company streamline all the paperwork we have to do on export?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it's everything about facilitate and verify what sort of data you have in your existing systems, and then looking at that and see that you have the correct data. And when you have done that, you can then look at the market and buy a customs declaration system or to file the declarations, and that can be based on an integration from your ERP. And there are we facilitate that in our system, Customs Management Global, where we can help the companies take the data out or streamline the data into our customs declarations for export or import into UK or into EU countries like France, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, etc. So that's our bread and butter of customs filings that we live on from our company perspective.
Thank you, Stefan. We have another question here that asks, will there be any governmental changes to help companies in the UK ease up trade?
Well, I think the free trade agreement is pretty solid. Of course, there can be new negotiations on that, but at this point, I think it hasn't been alerted from the UK government that they want to do changes to the free trade agreement at this point. It's pretty new, and that needs to settle before they go into the next stage of discussing that. From a declaration perspective, you can navigate out from doing the declarations import and export when you trade with EU, because UK is an own country now under own legislation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stefan. Moving on to our next question. How can I use customs processes for my e-commerce company in the best way when doing business with the EU?
That's a very good question. Everything depends on what type of e-commerce you have, first of all, and then there is coming a new legislation called low value consignment that is proceeded into effect next year. That means that all goods under 150 euros or 135 pounds needs to be declared, but with a simplified declaration process, and that could be used. And it also affects the VAT handling. So, for instance, a UK company can register a company and apply for a thing called IOSS, which is a centralized thing. So they do the VAT reporting to one country, but distributes all over European Union for that goods and pay, and the reporting of VAT will then be to the central. So it could be to Netherlands, it could be to Germany, depends on where you have your location of an e-commerce business from a UK perspective, and put your settlement in European soil. That could simplify the processes. But of course, it's all about capturing the right data and create the declarations. And then it's all also, do you ship the goods into distribution center? Can you sell the goods into your own company trade over the border and then distribute it into Europe? That saves the number of declarations. Instead of doing parcel by parcel, you could then do a bulk shipment, so to say, where you declare you as an exporter, your other company in European soil as the importer, and then the end client as the parcel is split it on the distribution center last mile.
Thank you, Stefan. We have another question from the audience, which I believe Ron has replied. It's typed the answer back, but it'd be great to share that also with the other viewers, if that's okay. The question that was asked was, when you say that you are providing a frictionless solution, is the IT directly integrated with HMRC and all EU countries' customs?
Yeah. And the question is, and the answer is, BluJay delivers custom solutions in multiple countries. So we offer a multi-country custom solution. And in the UK, we talk directly to HMRC. That's right. And that makes it for us possible to have a single shipment mode where we do import and export on that same shipment. And you have the full overview of that data. You reuse that data.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a single platform for multi-country.
Yes.
So that's very important, that you have a full transparency between the countries in there.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. We have another question from the audience regarding EORI numbers and imports, exports. There is news in the logistics customs markets that UK companies can clear export goods into the EU using an XI EORI number, typically used for Northern Ireland transactions. From an EU perspective, is this something that BluJay has experience or knowledge to verify?
It's a question I need to look into. I haven't seen that on the market yet. I mean, there are things happening in the market pretty quickly right now, but to secure your business, you need to have your own company registered in EU also to apply the right, because there are two different laws now. So in UK HMRC can't claim anything in Netherlands at this point. When we were under the same restrictions under EU law, both countries, then HMRC could claim something in Netherlands, but today they can't. So therefore you need to have your company registered or a fiscal representative registered that you use for that, because somebody needs to be claimed if there are any errors on that.
So you're saying, Stefan, that the idea of it is quite okay. The only thing is that we need two countries to agree upon, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Brilliant, thank you. I also had a couple of questions for you both before we wrap things up. How much of an impact has COVID-19 had on frictionless supply chains post-Brexit? I mean, how much has it complicated what is already a very complex issue?
I think, Stefan, you can comment on it, but I can shoot from, let's say, the supply chain perspective first.
Yes, please do that.
So yes, COVID is having a double effect on Brexit, of course, but COVID is something which is temporary, right? And Brexit is here to stay, so you need to stay and remain focused on that whole Brexit thing. And COVID is pushing us into different directions on transport flows, because of the rise of e-commerce and the downside of a lot of other products due to us all staying at home and not taking any products or services which are in the market. So there is a shift, but it's a temporary shift. It will go back to a certain point before COVID. So I'm sure about that one.
Yeah, and I mean, from if you look at it from a application perspective, SaaS solutions is growing. We can work with clients all over the world today and implement clients on a SaaS platform from all over the world, where people are sitting from home controlling and verifying and building the integrations, etc. So the IT structure have helped us as a company also continue grow our business, even if COVID has affected, of course, the human intervention, but electronically it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. I just had one more question for you both as well. You mentioned earlier in the presentation that UK companies are starting to look for warehouse locations in the EU to avoid delays. And on that, do you see these companies looking for their own warehouses, or could it actually be feasible that we'll see companies start to co-locate or perhaps share such facilities in order to make it even more cost effective?
Yeah, it's a very good question, John. So we see the both in the market, of course, and it's a bit depending how large your volumes are. So if you are, let's say, a Chinese manufacturer having a full DC in the UK, then you want to have that dedicated DC maybe in the Netherlands, right? But if you are delivering a few containers here and there, and you are part of a shared logistics operation in the UK, you might want to outsource that into the Netherlands to another logistics service provider, or maybe the same if it's an international one. So there are a lot of choices, and you see some things moving around. So yeah, the both are happening today.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous, thank you.
Okay.
We have one more question that's just come in from Yayesh Bharti, who says, for a GB country to import and export, is there a need for both a GB EORI and an EU EORI?
If you only import to UK, you only need a GB EORI. Yep. And you also need to apply for a duty deferral account. If you have also your company registered in EU, you would also apply for a EORA number in EU to simplify the processes there.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this webinar. I'd like to thank you both, BluJay Solutions Director of Solutions Consulting, Stefan Tarnberg, and Ron Verhagen, Vice President of Solutions Consulting. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'd also like to thank BluJay Solutions for sponsoring today's webinar, which again will be made available to view on demand from this afternoon via logisticsmanager.com in case you'd like to refer back to the presentation or share it around with a colleague. That's it. Thank you all for attending today's session. I'm John Thornton, and we'll see you again soon for the next Logistics Manager webinar. Goodbye.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.